We had been together for 3 years when Ethan finally made our relationship public on his social media. It was my 22nd birthday. He invited all his friends, saying he wanted to throw me a grand celebration. I was genuinely moved, thinking that my sincerity had finally been returned with his. But I never expected that he would suddenly break his promise that very day. By 7 p.m., guests had already begun to arrive at the villa one after another. But Ethan was still nowhere to be seen. I stood in the middle of the crowd, surrounded by people growing impatient. Someone turned to Vivian and asked irritably, "Where's Ethan?" I clutched my phone tightly and stammered, "Something urgent came up. He can't make it anymore." The truth was, I hadn't been able to reach him for over an hour. But everything had already been arranged, so I forced a smile and said, "Don't worry, everything's been set up. Just enjoy the food and have a good time." Even though I knew full well that very few of them had come out of genuine care for my birthday, I still tried my best to keep a calm appearance and welcomed every guest with a smile. Suddenly, someone in the crowd let out a mocking scoff. "What kind of hostess doesn't show up?" Then another voice chimed in with loud laughter. "What urgent matter could the great Ethan possibly have?" "Oh, that's right. He went to the airport to pick up Chloe." At that moment, my whole body froze, and the wine glass in my hand slipped and shattered on the ground. The woman who had just spoken was Julia, Chloe's close friend. As soon as she opened her mouth, everyone's attention turned to her. She held up her phone and gave it a little shake, looking quite proud of herself as she said, "Chloe just texted me. She's back in the country for a vacation." I crouched down to pick up the broken glass, and a shard accidentally pierced my finger. Julia sauntered over, swaying her hips, and looked down at me with a smug grin. "Well, looks like the main girl is back. Must be driving someone crazy, huh?" she added with a sneer. Who didn't know how obsessed Ethan was with Chloe back in high school? He chased her like a madman. I kept my head down and didn't say a word. Of course I knew how much Ethan used to like Chloe. How could I not? I had been quietly watching him from behind ever since I was 12. Seeing that I didn't respond, Julia quickly lost interest. "This food is awful," she said flatly. "I'm not sticking around." She turned to walk out, but suddenly paused as if remembering something. Spinning around with a sly smile, she said, "Oh, I almost forgot. Ethan's throwing Chloe a private maple leaf party tomorrow. It's happening at Rosewood Manor." She deliberately raised her voice to emphasize the last 4 words. That was the estate Ethan had personally designed when he turned 18, built especially for Chloe. The entire garden was filled with his favorite red roses. Unfortunately, not long after the college entrance exams, Chloe went abroad. After that, Ethan locked up the manor and never let anyone set foot inside again. This current villa was something Ethan had only rented temporarily for my birthday. It was May, and the climbing roses along the garden wall were in full bloom. Julia casually tossed the rose in her hand onto the ground, raised her high heel, and crushed it into the dirt. Then, with a pointed tone, she said, "Climbing roses rely on something to grow. They'll never compare to proud, self-standing roses." Laughter echoed all around me. I stood at the door, keeping the same polite smile on my face. "Sorry if my hospitality didn't meet your standards. Take care on your way out, Julia." Julia curled her lip in disdain and muttered, "Cheap things will never belong on a grand stage." After watching enough of the drama, the guests began to leave one by one. I stood there, watching everyone disperse. The energy drained from my body all at once, and I almost collapsed on the spot. A pair of hands caught me just in time. The man looked at me with furrowed brows, concern written all over his face. I turned and saw Ryan, so I forced a weak smile. "You haven't left yet?" He scratched his head, looking a bit sheepish. "I just got a call. Ethan said something urgent came up and asked me to help look after the guests, but now everyone's already gone." We'd known each other for more than 10 years. He was never good at lying. I could see right through him. I gave a bitter smile. "You don't have to cover for him. I know he went to find Chloe." Ryan looked embarrassed and awkwardly tried to explain. "Ethan's not the kind of guy who'd be that inconsiderate. I'm sure he has his reasons. Don't overthink it." Then, trying to comfort me, he added, "You two have been childhood sweethearts since you were little." Over a decade of feelings, something most people could never truly understand. My chest tightened with bitterness. Among all of Ethan's friends, Ryan was probably the only one who would ever think that way. After all, Ethan and I came from two completely different worlds. When I was 10, my father left my mother and me for another woman. Not long after, my mother abandoned me too, leaving me alone at the gates of a welfare home. I was a shy and timid child, which made me an easy target for bullying. The Zhou family was known for their passion for charity. One day, Ethan's parents brought him along to donate supplies and gifts. All the other kids rushed forward to collect presents, but I stayed hidden in a corner, crying. Someone had cut my hair out of spite. The director said I was withdrawn and antisocial, incapable of making friends. Ethan walked over to me, gently pressed a handful of candy into my palm, and smiled. "Here, have some candy. Don't cry, okay?" From then on, he visited often. Sometimes he'd bring his childhood friend Ryan along. We grew closer and closer. Eventually, the Zhou family decided to sponsor me and brought me to live with them. From the time I was 12 until I turned 17, I was always by Ethan's side. At school, when someone mocked me for being his personal maid, Ethan kicked over their desk and coldly warned, "Vivian is my little sister. Watch your mouth. Say something like that again and I'll deal with you every time." I was happy he defended me, but somewhere deep inside, I also felt a strange pang of sadness. In our junior year of high school, Chloe transferred to our school. She was stunning, like a princess straight out of a fairy tale. The boys chased after her relentlessly. Only Ethan seemed completely indifferent. Ryan joked that Ethan had too high of standards. Ethan just raised his eyebrows and said casually, "With Vivian around, how could I ever be interested in another girl?" I knew he was only joking, but my heart still skipped a beat. On the first night of the spring semester, during evening study hall, he came into the classroom and sat down beside me with a mysterious look on his face. "I've got something really important to tell you," he said. His serious expression made me nervous. "What is it?" I asked. He leaned in and whispered in my ear, "I'm going to pursue Chloe." I turned to look at him in disbelief. There was light in his eyes, bright and brilliant, but that light had nothing to do with me. He went on excitedly about how he had bumped into Chloe over winter break and slowly fallen for her. I just sat there, frozen, staring at the English vocabulary book lying limp on my desk, afraid that if I said even one more word, my emotions would spill out of my eyes without permission. At the end, he asked, "Vivian, you're in the same class as Chloe. You'll help me, right?" I heard myself answer softly, "Mm." He glanced at the girl who was surrounded by admirers across the room and walked away satisfied. That whole evening, I didn't flip a single page of my vocabulary book. I just stared at the very first word on the first line and repeated it in my head over and over. It was then I realized that my feelings for him had already grown wildly out of control, like untamed weeds. But I hid them well. I helped him deliver love letters, gifts, and messages with perfect devotion. Ethan's dream was to become an architectural designer. His very first design was a manor he created for Chloe. She loved red roses, so he planted an entire garden full of them with his own hands. In the blooming month of June, he confessed to his princess with all the sincerity in his heart, only to be rejected. Chloe told him her heart belonged to someone else, and that she would soon go abroad to reunite with that person. That night, Ethan drank alone in the rose garden until he passed out. I stayed by his side the entire night. It was the first time I had ever seen him cry. He must have really truly loved her. How alike we were, both loving someone we could never have. Later, we got into the same college. Ethan never brought up Chloe again. On Valentine's Day, he suddenly confessed to me, "Vivian, do you want to try being with me?" At that moment, I had just seen Chloe's social media post, a photo of her holding hands and kissing her boyfriend. My heart ached sharply, but I still nodded and said, "Okay." Looking back now, there was nothing romantic about that confession at all. But back then, my heart and my world were full of him. Even if the road ahead was a dark abyss, I was willing to fall into it with him. We only told Ryan about our relationship. He teased us, saying, "After all that circling around, the right person was by your side all along." Ethan didn't say anything. I knew he still needed time, but I was willing to wait. For 4 years of college, I stayed by Ethan's side, treading carefully, putting my heart into every little thing I did for him. Slowly, he started to care about me, little by little. On our 3rd anniversary, he posted a photo of us on his social media. We were holding hands, fingers interlocked, just like a couple genuinely in love. I thought I had finally found a place in his heart. But in the end, it was nothing more than an illusion. That night, Ethan never came back. The next morning, when I returned to campus, there was already a crowd gathered at the school gate. As soon as they saw me, someone walked over with a mysterious look and said, "Vivian, someone's looking for you." I pushed through the crowd and saw a stranger leaning against a Harley motorcycle. His features were sharp and cool, with an androgynous beauty that made it hard to tell if he was more handsome or beautiful. His long hair draped over his shoulders, and when he looked up and smiled, it was lazy, seductive, and inexplicably made my heart skip a beat. "You're Vivian, right?" he asked. "I came here just to find you." I looked at him doubtfully. "What for?" He walked toward me, and a soft violet fragrance wafted from him, unique and intoxicating. "My name is Julian Sage," he said. "I'm a fashion designer, and I'd like you to model for me." He explained that he had come across one of my photos through a friend and felt my appearance and aura matched his Zodiac-themed project perfectly. That's why he'd flown all the way from the UK just to find me. I was a little flattered, but years of low self-esteem made me instinctively hesitate. Julian, however, seemed completely confident. "I trust my eye," he said firmly. Seeing my uncertainty, he handed me his contact info and told me to take my time. We agreed I'd give him an answer in 3 days. Then, with practiced ease, he swung one leg over the motorcycle, and just like the wind, he rode off with cool elegance. At the time, I had no idea just how drastically meeting him would change my life. I saw Ethan again the day after Chloe's welcome back party. I was carrying my laptop and heading to the library to work on my thesis when I ran into him just outside the dorm building. The moment our eyes met, we both froze a little. "What a coincidence," I said awkwardly, offering a brief greeting. Ethan lit a cigarette and took a long drag before saying, "I was waiting here for you." He hadn't smoked in a long time. The last time I saw him like this was the night he got rejected by Chloe. I lowered my gaze and said quietly, "You could have just called me." After a pause, he asked, "Do you have time? Let's get something to eat." I nodded and said, "Okay." We walked in silence. The atmosphere was so awkward it felt like we were two strangers meeting for the first time. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "I missed your birthday. I'm sorry." I hadn't expected him to bring it up himself and didn't know how to respond. Before I could gather my thoughts, I heard myself say blandly, "It's fine." Ethan gave a soft laugh. I silently cursed myself. No matter what he did, the moment he offered even the smallest sign of affection, I forgave him without hesitation. I hated that I loved him this much and still had no control over it. Ethan drove me to the same restaurant where he'd once confessed to Chloe. The waiter brought out an exquisite cake and a bouquet of climbing roses. He carefully sliced a piece of cake and set it in front of me, his tone slightly apologetic. It was wrong of me to bail that day. Let me make it up to you now. I had always been weak when it came to him. As long as there was even a trace of affection in his actions, it was enough to make me smile like a fool. But then he said something that made my smile freeze. "This has nothing to do with Chloe." He added, "And then, Vivian, I want you to turn down Julian Sage's invitation." I blinked, confused. I didn't understand how the two things were connected or how he even knew about Julian at all. I stared at him, stunned. Why? This opportunity was supposed to be Chloe's. Then I heard him say, "Ethan told me Julian Sage only contacted you after accidentally seeing the anniversary photo he posted on Chloe's phone. That fashion showcase was specifically for emerging designers. Winning the Gold Award meant a chance to launch a personal brand under Future Studio. Julian was the frontrunner. To be his model would be nothing but advantageous. So, she's the one who sent you?" I asked. Ethan quickly explained, "Of course not. She's just too kind. Even though she was clearly upset, she still asked me to congratulate you on her behalf." I didn't respond. He was still just like before. Once someone brought up Chloe, Ethan couldn't stop talking. Honestly, she wanted to be the model herself. I have 100 ways I could help her get in, but she's so stubborn. She doesn't like relying on others. Even though he sounded like he was complaining, I could see the admiration in his eyes as he spoke. I lowered my head, scooped a bite of cake, and stuffed it into my mouth. It tasted so sweet, it almost turned bitter. "Won't you be mad about what you're doing now?" I asked. With full confidence, he smiled. "Just don't let her find out. When you turn Julian down, come up with a more appropriate excuse. Don't make it obvious." I looked at him, heart aching. "But doing this, it won't make me happy." Ethan was caught off guard. "You can barely speak on stage without stammering. What could you possibly see in modeling at a show like that?" I didn't flinch. "I just want to try. I want to know if I'm really as good as Julian said I was." Ethan's patience ran thin, his voice turned cold. "Vivian, I wasn't asking for your opinion. Look at yourself. What part of you even compares to Chloe? Why would you think you could compete with her?" The frustration I had kept bottled up finally exploded. With tears welling in my eyes, I said, "Your eyes and your heart are always filled with Chloe, but I'm your girlfriend now." Ethan didn't look at me. In a low voice, he said, "She's different." "What's so different about her?" I asked. He frowned, his gaze flickering. "Do I really have to spell it out?" My heart shattered into pieces. Without thinking, I shouted, "You love her. So what gives you the right to ask me to sacrifice for her?" Ethan snapped, blurting out without thinking, "Because everything you have came from my family." The moment those words left his mouth, even he looked stunned. I lowered my head, biting my lip hard to keep myself from crying. "I see." The air between us went still and silent, as if everything around us had frozen. Maybe realizing he had gone too far, Ethan tried to explain softly, "I didn't mean to look down on you." But I never lifted my head again. He grew visibly frustrated, stood up, and said, "Finish the cake, I'm leaving." Then, without looking back, he walked away. I collapsed completely. The tears came flooding out. I turned Julian down. I told him it was close to graduation and I really couldn't spare the time. He didn't push. He just said I hadn't thought it through and we could work together next time. Then he flew back to the UK. Ethan never officially broke up with me, but he stopped reaching out. The anniversary photo he had posted on social media was gone. In its place was a photo of a garden, full of red roses so vivid they burned my eyes. That was how we ended. Not even a goodbye. Just as sloppy and half-hearted as that confession had once been. At graduation, I went to Ryan to pick up something. By accident, I overheard their conversation. Ryan asked Ethan, "If you chose Vivian, then why can't you forget Chloe?" Ethan replied, "A will always be A, but B could be anyone." Ryan frowned. "So what are you planning to do now?" Ethan's voice was quiet but serious. "Chloe's single now. I want to go after her," Ryan sighed. "What about Vivian?" "I've liked you for over 10 years. Don't regret this later," Ryan said. Ethan replied with certainty, "I won't." So all the chaos I'd lived through over the years, he had known it all along. But if someone doesn't love you, no matter how much you give, it will never move them. I think it was really time for me to let go. After graduation, I declined the job that the Joe family had arranged for me and moved to another city. I had spent more than a decade orbiting around Ethan. Suddenly, losing that direction left me drifting through life like a ghost. The first Lunar New Year after I left, I spent the night alone in my tiny rented apartment. While scrolling through social media, I saw a photo posted by Julia. It was a group picture of her, Ryan, Chloe, and Ethan. I stared at their smiling faces for a long time. Everyone looked so happy. I opened my camera and took a selfie, trying to pretend I was happy too. But while I was smiling, tears started falling on their own. I wanted to talk to someone, so I tapped on the chat window with my college friend Mia. The last message was from just 2 hours ago. She had messaged excitedly, "Vivian, Guwanan and I are getting married." I replied, "Congratulations, congrats," and quietly closed the conversation. Then unexpectedly a message popped up from Julian Sage. "Happy New Year, Vivian." I was surprised that he even remembered me. I wiped my tears and replied, "Happy New Year, how have you been?" He asked, "How are you doing lately?" I paused, then replied, "Nothing great, nothing terrible, and you?" And just like that, we fell into a slow, casual conversation. He told me he hadn't won the gold award at that fashion show because he had withdrawn at the last minute. I was frustrated and asked him why. He said, "Because I want my favorite design to be worn by the person who fits it best." Feeling guilty, I asked, "So you still haven't found the right person?" he replied. It has to be you. I called him stubborn, but deep down, I felt a strange warmth. Maybe it was because I had never been so firmly chosen by someone before. At midnight, fireworks began outside. The brilliant bursts of color lit up the night sky, one after another, illuminating every corner of the city. I heard the sound of children laughing and cheering from the apartment upstairs, and suddenly the silent night came alive. Excitedly, I took a photo and sent it to Julian. Look, the fireworks are so beautiful. Instead of replying with a message, he called me on video. His eyes squinted slightly as he smiled, a smile so captivating it could make people fall. On the screen, I saw the same sky, the same scenery. That's when I realized we were in the same city. Julian told me he was here on a friend's invitation to consult on a personal fashion brand and was using a local studio to prepare for a May fashion show. He asked me again to model for him. This time, I agreed without hesitation. We quickly became close. When Maya's wedding came around, Julian took me shopping for a dress and helped me change my hairstyle. I looked at myself in the mirror, almost unrecognizable, and couldn't help but marvel. You really have the power to turn something ordinary into magic. He tapped my forehead and said, "Be more confident. You've always been beautiful." I always felt like Julian gave me energy, as if he was helping me slowly recover from the heartbreak I thought I'd never get over. On Valentine's Day in February, Nia married her first love, Gu Huanan. They didn't have much money, so little that her wedding dress was just a simple $30 white dress. Gu Huanan felt guilty and heartbroken about it. So I asked Julian for help. He suggested adding embroidered embellishments. Gu Huanan personally designed the patterns and stitched them by hand. He even learned how to make a veil. Watching this man, clumsily learning to sew just to do something special for the woman he loved, I thought, maybe this was what love really looks like. At the wedding, Maya wore that simple white dress and became the most beautiful bride in the world. When Gu Huanan lifted her veil and saw her face, he smiled through tears. And just like that, I couldn't stop myself from thinking about Ethan. I used to dream, over and over again, of standing with him at the altar, surrounded by flowers and light. I opened his social media only to see a brand new photo he'd just posted. Chloe was holding a bouquet of red roses. Ethan had his arm around her waist, looking at her with such soft eyes. The caption read, "No one but you is meant to grow old with me." Inside that little wedding chapel, the bride and groom exchanged vows of forever. Every breath of air was sweetened with love. The crowd chanted, "Kiss, kiss." Suddenly, I started laughing loudly. I joined in with everyone, shouting and teasing along with the rest. Julian stood silently beside me, not saying a word. After the wedding banquet ended, he suddenly turned to me and asked, "Want to go for a ride?" I nodded without a word. He handed me a helmet and reminded me, "The wind's gonna be strong. I won't be able to hear you. If you need something, just tap my shoulder." With that, he revved the engine and we took off, slicing through the wind. From one end of the city to the other, I sat on the back of Julian's motorcycle, crying like my heart was breaking. That desperate and pitiful love, finally, on this day, it came to a complete and final end. That night, Julian drank with me. A lot. For the first time, I told him about me and Ethan. He listened quietly. With puffy eyes, I asked him, "Why don't you like me? Am I really that bad?" He handed me a tissue and said gently, "It's not that you're not good, you just haven't met the right person. The one who truly understands you," he continued, "will see your flaws as insignificant, and your strengths? To them, they'll shine 100 times brighter. Even if you're buried in the dirt, they'll still spot you instantly as a dazzling gem." I looked down, disheartened. Is there really someone like that out there? He gave a soft smile. "First, love yourself. Be ready for when that person shows up." Then he raised his beer can and clinked it against mine. "Although, haven't you already met that person?" He pointed at himself and grinned. "The one who knows how to appreciate you." I looked into his eyes, dark, deep, and almost magical. In that moment, I felt like I was falling. Even years later, I would find myself thinking back to that night. It gave me courage to face an imperfect world. Because the one who stays with you forever isn't always love. Julian's world was wild and vibrant, full of color and chaos. I found myself falling into it, and slowly a bold idea started to grow inside me. To prepare for the upcoming fashion show, I began dieting and working out. I practiced my walk, honed my movements, gave it everything I had, 12 out of 10 effort. Sometimes, I'd imagine myself stepping onto the runway, lights shining on me, the crowd stunned into silence. The host would announce the designer's name, and thunderous applause would fill the room. It was a feeling I'd never experienced before. Just imagining it made my heart soar. But I never expected to run into Chloe at the show. We were assigned to the same dressing room. She was the opening model, dressed in a stunning red silk gown. She looked like a blooming rose, breathtakingly beautiful. The moment she walked on stage, applause erupted. She dazzled the entire room. When she returned backstage, an assistant handed her a bouquet of roses and whispered, "From Mr. Zhao." Chloe plucked a rose from the bunch, toyed with it in her fingers, then turned toward me as I sat at the makeup table. "I heard you and Ethan were together for 3 years," she said with a smirk, "and he never once gave you roses. Always gave you climbing roses, right?" I didn't respond. She continued, "Climbing roses and real roses may look similar, but they're worlds apart. Only someone with a dull eye would confuse the two." I stared at my reflection in the mirror, unable to stop myself from lowering my head. Just then, I heard Julian's voice by my ear. He placed a crown of roses on my head and smiled, raising his eyebrows. "You and these suit each other perfectly." I looked up into his eyes, so gentle, so sure. I took a deep breath, and for the first time, I wasn't lost. Maybe I didn't fully believe in myself, but I believed in Julian. That night, I was the final model to walk the runway. As I waited at the side of the stage, Julian held my hand the entire time. The closer it got to my turn, the tighter he held on. So even he got nervous sometimes. "It's okay," I said quietly. "Leave it to me." As the words left my mouth, even I was surprised. My heart was pounding like crazy, but somehow I said it, boldly, shamelessly. Julian glanced back at me, then gently loosened his grip. "Just walk forward with confidence," he said with a smile. I stepped onto the runway in a floral gown adorned with countless three-dimensional roses. In that moment, every eye in the venue locked on me. "Don't fall," I kept reminding myself. It was such a short walk, yet it felt longer than the entire journey of my life up to this point. I called Julian's name in my heart, and strength began to surge through me. I walked one steady step after another. When I reached the end of the runway and held my final pose, the audience erupted in thunderous applause, the loudest and most lasting of the night. Camera shutters clicked like a storm around me, flashes lighting up the air. The music and the lights intertwined into a dreamy world of fashion, and I stood right at its center. Before stepping onto the stage, all I wanted was to live up to Julian's expectations. But now, it had become more than that. The seed buried deep in my heart had broken through the soil and begun to bloom. After the show, Julian was stopped by someone. Rumor had it, a major figure in the fashion industry. I was thrilled for him. I stepped out of the venue alone, feeling like I was floating. "Vivian." A voice called my name. I turned and saw Ethan standing not far away. Behind him was his sleek black Mercedes. He had probably come to pick up Chloe. My heart gave a little tremble, and my breath caught for a second. He walked a few steps toward me and said casually, "Long time no see." I kept some distance, regulated my breathing, and replied politely, "Yeah, long time." Ethan gave a forced smile. "You've been doing okay?" I slowly calmed myself and answered, "I've been good." We stood in awkward silence. I was about to come up with a reason to leave when he suddenly said, "You look beautiful tonight." I froze for a moment and met his eyes. "I mean," he added quickly, "that dress suits you well. It really suits you." His voice was open, almost sincere. I smiled and replied, "Thanks for the compliment." Ethan looked at me with eyes full of something, hesitation, maybe like he had more to say. And then, out of nowhere, a slap cracked through the air and landed across my face. The force made me stagger. I turned my head and saw Chloe standing there, her expression furious. In front of everyone, flirting with someone else's boyfriend? "Do you have no shame?" she snapped. Ethan rushed forward, grabbing her hand. "It's not what you think. We just ran into each other. We barely spoke." Chloe shot me a disdainful glance. "Oh, please. I bet she's been scheming for this moment all along." Ethan frowned and said quietly, "I was the one who greeted Vivian first. It really had nothing to do with her." But Chloe wouldn't let it go. "Vivian. she sneered. Haven't seen you in a year and already you've become so impressive. Even Ethan's sticking up for you now? Did you learn how to seduce men from Julian? Bookmark. Hearing her insult, Julian like that made me furious. I was just about to step forward and slap her when, smack, another loud slap rang out. Chloe's head snapped to the side. She held her cheek, stunned, staring at the man in front of her. Julian had appeared out of nowhere. He pointed at me and said coldly, "Apologize to her." Ethan immediately pulled his girlfriend into his arms, trying to shield her. "This happened because of me," he said. "Let me apologize on her behalf." Chloe looked up at him, hurt. "Didn't you see her hit me?" Ethan tried to soothe her. "Let's not cause a scene, okay? You're not defending me?" Chloe's eyes widened in disbelief. Ethan hesitated, then said softly, "You really went too far just now." Chloe shoved him away, her eyes brimming with tears. "And you promised you'd never let me be wronged. That was all a lie, wasn't it?" She gave him one final glare, and then turned and ran off without looking back. Ethan glanced back at us, apologetic, then quickly chased after her. I watched their entangled silhouettes and couldn't help but think back to the past. When I was with Ethan, we never really fought. One of my close friends once told me that women like me were boring, that I should learn to express my emotions a little more. There was one time, on my birthday, we had agreed to go see a movie together. He showed up late, way late, said he'd been playing basketball with friends and lost track of time. I grumbled, "The movie's practically over." He replied casually, "It's just a movie. We can just buy another ticket." I felt a wave of disappointment. "You didn't care about the promise you made to me at all, did you?" He furrowed his brow, clearly annoyed. "I'm here, aren't I? What more do you want?" After a few minutes of arguing, I ran off feeling wronged. I looked back at him 3 times, hoping he'd come after me. He never did. That night, I sat alone on a bench at the bus stop, letting the wind blow through me for hours. No phone call, no message. In the end, it was still me who swallowed her pride and went back to make peace. See? The line between love and indifference is always painfully clear. I pulled my gaze away and gently linked arms with Julian. "Let's go." Julian looked worried. "Are you okay?" I nodded. "If you're feeling bad, you don't have to hide it in front of me." "Really, I'm fine," I said with a small smile. I'm no longer that foolish girl who put all her joy, anger, sorrow, and happiness in Ethan's hands. On the way back to the hotel, Julian told me he had secured an investor. I was genuinely happy for him, and even my steps felt lighter. We walked the same road we had yesterday. One of the streetlights was out. But somehow, it didn't seem so dark anymore. My Flower Fairy look had landed on several major media outlets' top lists. A modeling agency reached out, hoping to sign me, but I turned them down. As dazzling as that Cinderella moment was, I was even more captivated by the idea of becoming a designer's muse, a fairy godmother of sorts, someone who could make others shine with magic. Julian was heading to France to expand his career. I decided I would follow him there and study fashion design. When I resigned from my job, I was nervous and asked him, "Do you think I'm being unrealistic?" He didn't answer right away but asked, "Is this just a whim?" I shook my head. "No, I've thought about this carefully. Until now, my whole life had revolved around Ethan. Even my choice to major in accounting was just because he once said he'd want a reliable financial advisor in the future. This was the first time I was doing something for myself." Julian's expression softened into a bright smile. "Then I'll be waiting for you in France." To keep that promise, I threw myself into studying with everything I had. After more than half a year of hard work, I was finally accepted into SNOR, a prestigious international fashion design school in France. Before leaving, I returned briefly to my old city. I'd heard that Ethan's mother was in the hospital. She had always treated me kindly. It was only right that I go visit her. I asked Ryan to take me when no one else was around. He sighed and said, "Is it really necessary to sneak around like this? I just want to avoid unnecessary misunderstandings," I explained. "And trouble." His expression grew a little complicated. "You don't have to worry about that. Ethan and Chloe broke up." I froze. "What? Why?" Ryan explained, "The moon only looks beautiful because of its distance. Get too close and you'll see all the rough craters." He told me they had been fighting often ever since they got together. Ethan loved Chloe, so he was always the one to back down. But he was also someone who grew up surrounded by attention, prideful by nature. He couldn't endlessly compromise without limits. Over time, the tension built up. Recently, Chloe had thrown a tantrum again. This time, she smashed the jade bracelet Ethan gave her. It had been a Zhao family heirloom, meant for the future daughter-in-law. Ethan's mother had treasured it dearly. She was so upset she ended up in the hospital, and her health had already been poor to begin with. This time she couldn't recover. Ethan had always been filial. He blew up at Chloe for the first time. That fight was the final straw. They broke up for good. They were never a good match, Ryan sighed. I didn't want to comment on that. I changed the subject. Was the bracelet able to be repaired? Ryan scratched his head. Ethan's been searching everywhere. But he's asked a dozen jade shops, and they all said it can't be fixed. I thought for a moment and said, maybe I can help. He narrowed his eyes at me, teasing, still, you're the one who treats Ethan best. I shook my head and denied it. I just want his mom to feel a little better. Ryan didn't say anything else after that. I reached out to a friend I'd met through my study abroad program. His grandfather was a seasoned craftsman who had worked with jade for decades. I'd had the chance to meet him once and was deeply impressed by his exquisite skill. I handed the broken jade bracelet to Ryan and asked him to pass it along to Ethan. He frowned and said, why make this so complicated? The two of you could just meet face to face. I lowered my gaze and said softly, there's no need. Ryan looked at me for a long moment, then said suddenly, I've always thought you and Ethan were the ones who really belonged together. After a pause, he added, have you ever thought about getting back together? I shook my head and interrupted him. He doesn't love me. Then I smiled faintly and said with relief, and I don't love him anymore. As soon as I said it, Ryan's expression subtly changed. His gaze shifted past me, looking behind. I turned around and saw Ethan standing there. He was behind us the whole time, looking at me with an unreadable expression. His lips parted like he wanted to say something, but nothing came out. I said goodbye to Ryan, then walked straight toward Ethan, brushing past him without stopping. This time, I was chasing my own future. After arriving in France, Julian and I rented a small villa with a garden, located between my school and his studio. He was hopeless when it came to domestic life. The house was completely empty, with no furniture except for a mattress he tossed on the floor to sleep on. I scoured second-hand shops and brought back a bunch of furnishings. He always complained I was making too much fuss, yet still helped me assemble everything quietly, never once walking away. I even cleaned up the neglected garden and installed a swing set out there. When he had free time, Julian would sit on the swing with a guitar in his lap, strumming and singing Secret Garden. He seemed to really love that song. He even named his brand after it. Whenever I looked at him, I felt like my life had become something out of a dream. In the second year of launching his brand, Julian held his first major fashion show. It was a huge moment, crucial for building his reputation. Since I had started school, I'd been helping out at his studio. For this show, I was in charge of coordinating with the stage design team. I'd heard the designer had been personally invited by the brand's investor, someone quite mysterious. What I didn't expect was that person to be Ethan. He still looked striking, handsome, charismatic, with that same magnetic presence that could pull anyone in with just one glance. But by now, my heart no longer skipped a beat when I saw him. I walked up confidently and greeted him. He returned a slight wave, seeming more reserved than I was. I didn't stay to make small talk. I quickly dove into my work. The communication went smoothly, and we finalized the plan in no time. Ethan looked genuinely impressed. I didn't expect you to know so much about architecture now. I answered calmly. Architecture and fashion share a lot in common. He stared at me for a long while, his dark eyes reflecting my face. You've really changed, I smiled lightly. People grow. He invited me to dinner. I turned him down. As I stepped out of the studio, it began to rain. I hadn't brought an umbrella and found myself stranded at the door. Ethan caught up and said, "Let me walk you back." We shared a single umbrella as we strolled slowly toward the parking lot. He tilted the umbrella toward my side, shielding me from the wind and rain. By the time we reached the car, his shoulder was soaked. Old memories floated back to me. One time during a date, it had started raining suddenly. I'd been feeling playful, and only bought one umbrella at the convenience store on purpose, hoping we could stroll through the rain together, stepping in puddles like in the movies. But he'd held the umbrella firmly and pulled me along as fast as he could. By the time we got back to campus, one side of me was drenched, and I was shivering with cold. He'd frowned and scolded me. Told you we should have gotten two. I ended up working with Ethan for 3 months. Julian's fashion show was a massive success. The garden stage Ethan had designed added a beautiful touch to Julian's early spring collection. After the show ended, Ethan said he wanted to walk around Paris and asked if I could be his guide. As a gesture of thanks, I didn't refuse. Paris is a romantic city. Street performers played soft melodies, the open doors of cafes released warm scents into the air, and at night along the Seine, lanterns lit the riverside, while someone down on one knee proposed with candlelight. Ethan suddenly stopped, his eyes fixed on the scene. There was a faint melancholy in his gaze. I figured he must be thinking of Chloe again. "I've been looking for you for a long time," he suddenly said. I froze, puzzled, and turned to look at him. He explained, "You helped fix the jade bracelet. I never got the chance to thank you. When I went to find you, you were already gone." I waved it off. "It was nothing, really, you don't need to thank me." But then he paused and added, "It wasn't just about that." He looked as though something finally clicked in his mind. "All these years, you've given me so much." I frowned slightly and didn't respond. His expression suddenly turned serious. "Actually, I came here this time for you." After a brief pause, he said quietly, "Vivian, I regret it. Can we start over?" He looked at me with eyes full of emotion, as if they held an entire ocean of love. In the past, I might have drowned in that gaze, but now my heart didn't even ripple. Meeting his eyes, I replied calmly, "Ethan, I don't want to be your second choice anymore." "That's not what this is," he stepped forward quickly, trying to explain. "I'm not the same person I used to be." I stepped back and gave him a small smile. "But I've changed too. I don't want to love you anymore." His shoulders slumped, and sadness flickered in his eyes. He gave a bitter smile. "I figured you wouldn't say yes, but I still wanted you to know how I feel." Then, just as quickly, he composed himself again, lifting his brows with resolve. "But this time, I'm not giving up." I didn't expect Ethan to seriously begin pursuing me again. He started flying to France often, showing up with all kinds of surprises. No matter how many times I turned him down, he never gave up. On my graduation day, he came again, just like always, carrying a gift and a large bouquet of climbing roses. When I was 12, on the day I was taken from the orphanage, he had shown up just like this, holding a stuffed animal in one hand and a bunch of roses in the other. Back then, I had run toward him, glowing with joy, chasing the light he carried with him. But now, over a decade of missed moments and overlooked feelings had stacked up, building a wall as wide as an ocean between us. I didn't like climbing roses anymore. I stood in place, unable to take a single step forward. His eyes dimmed. "Then, what do you like now? I'll bring you something different next time." "Ethan," I said gently, "don't waste your time on me anymore. Not everything in life gets a second chance." Then I turned and walked away without looking back. Julian was waiting for me not far away. I picked up my pace to meet him. "You're really not going to give him another chance?" he asked. I nodded. He was silent for a moment, then asked, "Is it that you don't want to be in a relationship at all, or that you just don't want one with him?" I lowered my head. Julian looked at me softly. "If it's the second, I respect your decision, but if it's the first, then let me say this. There are still so many beautiful kinds of love in this world. Don't shut yourself off from happiness because of one heartbreak." Over the years since Ethan and I broke up, I'd met a few good men, people who genuinely liked me, but I'd been too timid and cautious to open my heart again. Julian always had this way of seeing right through me. Sometimes I would wonder, if Julian were a man, I think we could have fallen in love and stayed that way for life. I clung to his arm and teased, "Why do I need to date anyone? Having a bestie like you is enough." He gave me a look of mock disdain. "That won't work. If you're not getting married, I am." I widened my eyes, playfully nosy. "Oh? What kind of man could possibly be good enough for our fabulous beauty?" He smiled but didn't answer. After graduation, I joined Julian's company and officially became a designer at Secret Garden. At the time, his brand was on the verge of a major expansion, and for the most important fashion show of the season, he invited me to collaborate with him. I was honored and thrilled, but as a newcomer, I couldn't help feeling insecure. Julian, just like always, looked at me with unwavering confidence and said, "I trust my judgment." This collection was themed around roses. We worked day and night, brainstorming and designing, determined to make roses bloom on every dress. Julian and I shared a remarkably aligned vision. We wanted every woman to live like a proud, independent rose, full of grace and tenderness, but also with the courage to withstand thorns. The show was a resounding success, unlike anything we'd ever experienced. When we stood on stage together, receiving flowers and thunderous applause, Julian leaned toward me and said, "Roses all the way. From now on, may the road ahead be filled with blossoms." What a beautiful thing to say. But life always seems to strike hardest when you least expect it. The day after the show, Julian suddenly disappeared. A month later, when he returned, he was like a completely different person. He spent his days holed up in the studio, drinking himself into oblivion. He looked so broken, but no matter how we asked, he wouldn't tell anyone what had happened. And then, not long after, he attempted suicide. I found him at the studio, surrounded by a mess of empty bottles, curled up in a corner without moving, as if he'd stopped breathing altogether. I rushed him to the hospital that very night. The doctor told me he had swallowed an entire bottle of sleeping pills. It was only because I found him in time that his life was saved. When he woke up, he didn't say a word. How could someone so beautiful and strong collapse so suddenly without warning? I stayed by his side every day, helpless and anxious. Nothing I did seemed to get through. Then one afternoon, a girl in the next bed happened to play the song "Secret Garden." At the first notes, Julian completely broke down and cried. That's when I finally learned the truth. Julian had once been in love with the man who composed Secret Garden. The night of our show's triumph, his partner had boarded a red-eye flight. The plane crashed in a remote wilderness. That flight's destination had been Paris. Was he coming to find Julian? We'll never know the answer now. Julian shut down the company and decided to travel alone. "Are you disappointed in me?" he asked quietly. I bit my lip and shook my head. To me, Julian had always been a pillar of strength, a person I admired, leaned on, and relied on. But I had never really taken the time to understand his own struggles. I didn't think I had the right to feel disappointed. All I felt was overwhelming sorrow at the thought of losing him. "You'll come back someday, won't you?" I asked in a small voice. He didn't reply. He only smiled and said, "I have a gift for you." He led me into his room. In the middle stood a beautiful wedding dress. One look, and I knew it was his design. "Try it on. Let's see if it fits." He helped slip the gown over me and looked at me through the mirror. In a gentle voice, he said, "I hope you find your happiness soon, Vivian." I couldn't hold back any longer. The tears spilled down uncontrollably. We gave up our little villa. I watched the traces of our life together slowly disappear as we packed things away. My heart felt just as empty. When Julian left, he carried only a small suitcase and his guitar. "Where will you go next?" I asked. He shrugged. "I don't know." He told me he had no parents. He'd grown up without a place to belong. Maybe that's why he felt so suited to wandering. I watched him turn and walk away with such quiet finality. Suddenly I was terrified. Terrified that if I didn't do something, he would vanish from the world completely. "When I wear the wedding dress, will you come back?" I called out behind him. He paused, but he didn't turn around. I ran after him and blocked his path. "You'll come back to bless my marriage, right?" Julian looked at me with eyes that had lost their light. I gripped him tightly. I gripped his shoulders tightly, repeating the same question over and over. By the end, my voice was almost begging. At last, he nodded and agreed. "Okay." I was a selfish person. I knew he might suffer, yet I still used that clever little promise to hold him back. After Julian left, I began to suffer from insomnia. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, staring at the unfamiliar walls, and feel loneliness wrap around me like layers of cold stone. The suffocating feeling was no less than a heartbreak. One day, without even realizing it, I found myself walking back to our old villa. A real estate agent was showing it to a client. Seeing it again made my chest ache with pain. I turned away and hurried off. "Vivian?" A familiar voice called out behind me. Ethan caught up and pulled me into his arms, his voice hoarse. "Where have you been these days? I was really worried about you." The December wind was bone-chilling, making it hard not to long for a little warmth. I raised my hand slightly, then let it drop. In the end, I didn't push him away. Ethan held me tighter and spoke gently. "Come back to the States with me, Vivian. I don't feel right leaving you alone here." I was emotionally drained. Even my mind felt foggy. I nearly nodded. Then my phone rang, loud and shrill. Ethan glanced at the screen and frowned slightly before quickly rejecting the call. Just as he was about to speak, the phone started ringing again, even more urgently. "You should answer," I said with a small smile. "It might be important." He gave me a conflicted look, then walked a short distance away to take the call. Meanwhile, the agent and client came out of the villa. Apparently, the deal hadn't gone through. "May I take a look inside?" I asked in French. The agent nodded eagerly and led me in. Everything was just like it had been before. Julian and I had spent over 3 beautiful years living here. The memories were vivid. Sometimes I blamed him for being so close, yet never confiding in me about his pain. But just now something clicked in me. Maybe it wasn't that he didn't want to talk. Maybe he couldn't. I used to think that having dreams and a career made someone an adult, but I realize now, deep inside, I had never grown the kind of proud, independent Rose I thought I had. I had lived by the light Julian gave me. That was why I had shone so brightly. Now that he was gone, I had withered along with him. If only I had realized this sooner. I stepped back outside and looked at the garden swing. I whispered to myself, "If only." Ethan returned from his call and saw me standing there, lost in thought. He tapped me lightly on the head. "If you like it so much, I can install the exact same swing for you at my place." I shook my head. "There's no need. No one's going to sit there playing guitar and singing anymore." Then I added, "I'm not going back to the States with you." He came over and took my hand. "Why not?" I pulled away and asked, "That call just now, it was from Chloe, wasn't it?" His body tensed instantly. Nervously, he explained, "She's in trouble and came to me for help. If you don't want me to talk to her, I'll delete her contact right now." I lifted my eyes slowly and said, "I don't mind." He froze. "Ethan," I said quietly, "I really don't love you anymore." His eyes turned red. "But just now, you clearly." "That was just me being weak," I said. "I wanted someone, anyone, to stay by my side. Even if it hadn't been you, I wouldn't have pushed them away." Ethan trembled all over. "I don't believe you." "It's not that you don't believe me," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "You just don't want to accept it." Then I smiled. "We're adults now. Instead of dragging things out painfully, let's end this with dignity." He looked at me for a long, long time in silence. I was the first to turn and walk away. Back in Paris, I found a new job as a designer and rented our old villa again. I began to get used to solitude and slowly learned to open my heart, preparing myself to welcome new people into my life. The first year after Julian left, I gradually pieced my life back together. The next time I heard anything about Ethan was when news of his marriage to Chloe went viral online. The headlines praised him. Talented architect builds a rose garden to win the favor of his bride's family. In spring, pale pink blossoms covered the entire courtyard. The couple held a grand wedding there that quickly became a fairy tale story passed from mouth to mouth. But some sharp-eyed netizens noticed something strange. Miss Chloe had always adored roses. Why then would she spend the rest of her life surrounded by wildflowers instead? No one answered the question. The gossip faded as quickly as it had come. I didn't have the energy to guess what Ethan was thinking anymore. I simply hoped we could both live our lives in peace. The second year after Julian left, I met Maya. She had divorced Nathan. The man she had once loved so fiercely had found fame and then fallen in love with someone else. Maya put on a strong front, but I worried she might disappear from my life, just like Julian had. I stayed close, not daring to relax even for a second. One day she asked me, "Nathan once promised he'd make me happy. Why do words mean nothing in the end?" I thought for a moment, then answered honestly, "In this world, only you will never betray yourself. Instead of relying on someone else for happiness, maybe it's better to fight for it on your own." She leaned on my shoulder and said I'd grown up a lot. "Julian, if only you could hear this." I'm not that insecure, timid girl who cried all the time anymore. I've become someone others can lean on, even just a little. Maya bought a vineyard and decided to settle down in Paris. I resigned from my company job and began preparing to open my own bridal studio. On opening day, I received a large bouquet of roses. The card only had a message of congratulations, no name. I rushed outside and from a distance caught a glimpse of Ethan's silhouette. He stood alone, walking through the wind, his figure tinged with melancholy. By then, I had already learned from Maya what had really happened between him and Chloe. After returning home that time, Chloe arranged to meet Ethan. While he was drunk, she drugged him. Later, she used her pregnancy to force him into marriage. But married life was chaotic, full of constant conflict and scandal. Their name became a running joke among mutual acquaintances. I watched Ethan's figure disappear at the end of the street, then turned and gave the roses in my hand to a beggar on the corner. I didn't call out to him, and he didn't look back. The third year after Julian left, my bridal brand finally gained a foothold. I planned my very first fashion show on the day of my 30th birthday. Maya often sighed and joked that while I was thriving in my career, I remained unlucky in love. I had dated new people over the years, but each relationship ended in failure. A perfect love, it seemed, was a luxury not everyone could afford. I decided to wear the wedding dress Julian had given me for my show. That was the happiest moment of my life, and it felt right to honor our promise that way. It was, I admit, a little sneaky to keep the promise on my own terms. But Julian, I really miss you. Will you come that day? To this day, I still haven't met a soulmate. But I'm no longer afraid. What I fear most now is never seeing you again. You once told me you were a person with no place to return to, so I bought the little villa we used to live in. The garden has roses, and I've planted your favorite violets too. The table, the chairs, the swing, everything is just as it was. Can this place become your home? Julian, when will you come back? I'm still waiting for you. The end.